to our podcast, Raising Bigs. This podcast is an ongoing conversation between myself and my young adult son. We're ready and willing to talk about all the things families might experience in their lives and relationships, both as parents and young adults, from teens to 20-somethings. The good, the bad, and sometimes the ugly. In this episode, we're discussing the topic of pressure. Whether you put it on yourself, feel it from others' expectations, or think it comes from society, pressure is felt by so many, and it can really do a number on us. It can be pressure to do the right thing, to perform, to make someone proud, or live a certain lifestyle. It would be ideal if we never felt pressure from outside forces. So often it is unhealthy and in conflict with what we personally feel called to do. Internal pressure can be beneficial if it's healthy and allows us to do what we have decided is important to each of us. Pressure is a mixed bag of disappointment and achievement, potentially. How can you handle pressure, both internal and external? It makes all the difference. Let's dive in. I'm Marci, and I'm the mom.
I'm Cayd, and I'm her kid. We all have felt pressure at different points in our lives and for different reasons. Parents feel pressure just like young adults do. And at times, the right pressure can actually propel you forward and make you make advancements in your life that you might not thought you would be able to make. And at other times, it can make you freeze up and completely stall out and can kind of make you just stop all of your progress. I can think of times pressure has felt really uncomfortable and was frankly unnecessary for me. I can also think of times where the pressure that was applied to me, either by myself or by external forces, really pushed me and allowed me to accomplish things that I didn't think I would be able to. We can't completely get rid of pressure, but let's talk about how to keep it in check and make sure that it's a good kind of pressure and a positive pressure. So, Mom, what type of pressure do parents experience while raising bigs?
I think there's a lot of pressure. Some of it comes from our own internal expectations, right? Of what our kids' lives are going to be like, what things they're going to accomplish, how they're going to behave. And sometimes that's fueled by societal pressure, right? And you're worried as a parent about what others will think of you because of something your child does. So there is a lot, does or doesn't do. There's a lot of pressure surrounding that as parents. I think there's also a lot of pressure because you feel yourself responsible for making sure your child has all of the resources that they need, that they have been taught the right things. And a lot of times, by the time your child is big, if that foundation groundwork has not been laid, it's kind of difficult to go back and do that. So there's a lot of pressure to ride that balance between letting your child live their own life and then also to not try to control things, because that is a big battle that parents face. There's just a lot of pressure to try to help their child stay on the rails, right? So that they can achieve their maximum potential. I would say that might be the biggest pressure of all as a parent. And it's just wanting to perform well as a parent, wanting to make sure that you've given your child everything you possibly could to help them be successful and be a good contributing member of society. So that's kind of the pressure that I've experienced as a parent, and that I know from talking to my friends, my peers, that they also experience. Does that sound like something that you recognize, Cayd, as parental pressure?
Yeah, for sure. That's kind of in my mind because obviously I'm not a parent, so I can't speak to it. But in my mind, that's what I would envision the pressure of being a parent would be. Because, like I said, it's just kind of that pressure of not only now are you responsible for your life, but you're responsible for the life of another person, how they turn out, the type of person they are, whether they're taken care of. So that it almost kind of doubles the pressure that, you've lived with your whole entire life. So it was definitely interesting to hear about.
Yeah. And what kinds of pressure, Cayd, have you dealt with as a young adult growing up? That's the other side of the equation, right? So the
hmm
bigs pressure, what kind of pressures are there?
For sure. I think there's definitely some pressure to be successful and not necessarily even in, the amount of money you make, not in that traditional successful sense, but just whatever it is. If you are, in school, you want to be successful and, make your parents proud. If you are, taking your driver's test for the first time, you want to be successful with that and, making sure that that's good. If you're learning to cook for the first time, you want to be successful with that. Whatever it is when you're growing up, especially as a young adult, I think that is probably the most pressure filled time in your life because there's a lot of pressure to start in your career field, whether that means going to college or going to trade school or just getting started. There's pressure to, date and meet people and start a family. There's pressure to have friendships. There's pressure to still maintain a relationship with your family, even though you may have moved out of the house or moved out of the state that, the rest of your family is in or whatever it is. And I think now, especially for young adults my age, there's, social media, which adds that extra level of pressure of you can see people that are your age and whether they're doing better than you or doing, less than you, whatever it may be. There's a lot of pressure, as you're growing up. And then I think there's also the pressure of trying to figure out life for the first time. As a young adult, you're, like I said, you're doing a lot. You're trying to maybe start a family, you're trying to get established in your career, you're maybe going back to school, you're whatever it is that you're doing with your life as a young adult. There's a lot of pressure there to be successful. So I think that's, like I said, is just a time period in your life where pressure is probably the most high.
I would agree. And I think, pressure for you as a young adult now is very different than it looked for me, back in 1986 when I graduated from
Hmm.
high school. Like the pressures were very different. There were fewer choices, right? But with that choice also comes additional pressure. And so I think young adults today are just dealing with a different level of pressure than their parents were dealing with back when they were going through it. And so sometimes I think that can cause some misunderstandings or some underestimating on the part of the parents as to what their children are actually going through as they navigate young adult.
Hmm. For sure. So where do you think that parental pressure that you talked about earlier, where do you think it comes from? Is it more internal? Is it from, friends and family? Is it, where does that pressure, where is it rooted?
I think for me, it was internal, but initially generated by societal norms, right? So like, we didn't always have a lot of money when you guys were growing up. And so I knew that there were things that you guys were talented enough and wanted to do, like competitive show choir, that there was pressure to be able to work a job to earn enough money to provide that experience for you guys.
Hmm.
That, we were surrounded by people whose kids were involved in everything. And those everythings get super, super expensive. And so I think there was a societal expectation that then I put on myself that it was my responsibility to find a way to make that happen. I have zero
Hmm.
regrets that I did because, in particular, talking about show choir, like I think that really built confidence in all three of you as far as your ability to go out in the world, make new friends, navigate, try new things, put yourself out there, an endless list of ways that you benefited from that. But I think it starts with society a lot of times, and then the parents put it on themselves. I also think that it comes internally as well. Like I think we put a lot of
Hmm.
things on ourselves as parents, especially if we're worried about a child in a certain circumstance. So like if I have a child who's struggling with something, I'm going to feel like I have to solve that for them. And I think that's a real growth thing for parents of bigs when that transition shifts to that is not my thing to solve. I'm here to support my child, to provide resources, but it is actually their thing to solve. So a lot
Hmm.
of that internal pressure, I think, is key too. So how about you, Cayd? The pressure on young adults, where do you think it comes from most often? Is it external? Is it internal? Where's it originating?
I think it's a mix of both. I think it definitely depends on your situation, what your goals are, what, the environment you were raised in. I think some young adults feel pressure from their parents, if their parents are paying for their college and things like that. Sometimes there's that pressure of, okay, I have to do good, I have to be successful, or, I have to become a lawyer or a doctor, I know that's also a very cultural thing, whatever my parents wanted me to be. I think that there's also some societal pressure, kind of like I talked about earlier with social media, is you're seeing other people be successful and other people do things that maybe you thought you would have accomplished by a certain age or things like that. So I think there is some pressure with that. I think it's internal pressure of wanting to be successful, wanting to be able to say you've accomplished this, accomplished that. So I think that it's kind of a mix of both external and internal pressure. And I think some of it can be positive. I think some of it, you might pressure yourself to, make more money, which can be successful. You might pressure yourself to go out and, be out of your comfort zone and make new friends, and that can be beneficial. So I think that there is some benefits to the pressure, but I think it's kind of like you said, it's a mix of both for the bigs as well when you're looking at the parents' pressure.
And I think some of the younger generations have gotten an unfair reputation as not having enough pressure on them, right? And
Hmm.
there are always people who maybe are not moving through the progression to adulthood and to independence as quickly as society thinks they should, as quickly as external family members think they should, as quickly as the parent
Hmm.
thinks they should. But I heard a doctor the other day, and I'm going to blank on his name, but it was on Mel Robbins' podcast. And what he said was that children do well when they can, and also transition to that to adults do well when they can. Like, if someone is not able to create that life for themselves and to move on to that next stage of adulthood, there's probably something that is happening or has happened, or that is a component that was missing in their growing up, and that maybe shouldn't feel like pressure. It should maybe feel like, what resources do we need to surround this person with? So I want to encourage some parents that if it seems like your big is not putting enough pressure on themselves, not enough internal pressure to have the drive to go out and live an independent life, right? And be successful as a young adult in the world, that can be a conversation you can have, again, from a place of curiosity, to see if there's something that you can do to help with that.
For sure, for sure. I think that's good. Sorry, I lost track. I'm at how do you deal with external pressure? Okay, sorry again. So, Mom, how do you deal with external pressure when it's uncomfortable? When you're starting to feel that pressure and it's not in a good way, it's not propelling you forward to advance.
Yeah, I know, undue pressure can really make us freeze up. So, there's fight, flight, freeze, fawn. We've got all of those survival responses by our nervous system, right? When I start to feel a lot of pressure that is not coming from internal, I used to either try to overproduce, right? Busy is a way of fighting.
Hmm.
So I heard another friend say recently, busy is a way of fighting. So that was typically my default, was busy. Then I started to get mad about that. And I was just like, I don't want to be this busy. Like, this is not the life I want for myself. So then I started to get kind of angry if I was feeling pressure from the outside. Like, who do they think they are having those expectations for my life? Like, I don't have to buy into their pressure. And I kind of gained my independence in that. And now, really, with external pressure out there, and that doesn't matter if it's external pressure from society as a whole, from any kind of the structures that are out there. Like, I've always been a rule follower. I have said I am a rule follower with a rebel streak. The older I get, the wider that rebel streak gets, because now when I'm feeling external pressure, it's like, I don't have to respond to you. I don't have to respond to you. I'm going to have my own internal pressures that are in alignment with what I want to do. So if it's starting to feel uncomfortable, my default now is to simply dismiss it. And, that might not always be healthy, but it is what feels right and true to me. And there may be people who experience disappointment, but I'm going to let them be disappointed, because that is not my issue. That is their issue to handle. So when you talk about boundaries, and that's on their side of the fence, right? They have to deal with their feelings. So if they're disappointed by something I do, by a choice I make in my life, that's not my issue. And
Hmm.
that might feel a little cold to some people who are still kind of in the people pleasing mode, but that is some personal growth and development that I've really had to do to change the way that I deal with external pressure.
For sure. I think that's good. And I think, like you said, it's important to figure out what is in alignment with what you want to do. Is that external pressure something that's pushing you to do something that is maybe uncomfortable, but you need to do? Or is it something that's pushing you to do something that you don't want to do, you don't need to do, it doesn't have any benefit to your life? Because sometimes I do think that pressure that makes you uncomfortable is needed. I think sometimes it pushes you to do things that you need to do or want to do that you might not necessarily go and do yourself. So it's important to recognize, where that pressure is coming from and what it is at its true
Mhm.
core.
Well, and I think it can look like encouragement, right? Like, if it's coming from, let's say, your friend group, and they're like, but Marci, you said one of your values was XYZ, and that you really wanted to do this. Are you abandoning yourself? Like, that kind of external pressure is very different than, you need to do this because I said so. Yes, when it comes to things like, driving the speed limit, not treading on other people's social rights, things like that. those rules are there for a reason as a society, right? And I fully believe that we need to respect those, and that those are not the types of things we're talking about. But
Mhm.
for instance, when I left corporate America, started my coaching business, and, you know, had just a very interesting year last year with some health issues and things like that. And I have decided this year to take on an additional outside source of income, sometimes several sources of income, depending on what that looks like. There is a societal expectation, a pressure of every parent who is able-bodied, especially parents who have a college degree, should be working a full-time job, making a certain amount of money, rather than you should be following your heart and finding a place where your skill sets and talents and gifts can be shared and can leave an impact. So that's one of the scales that I use. Like, is that pressure coming at me because it is a societal expectation, or is that pressure coming at me because it's someone helping me be accountable to myself or offering me an opportunity that I need to consider? So I'm glad you
Mhm.
brought that up. Cayd, if you've got external pressure that feels out of alignment, right, with something you want to do coming at you, either that's me pushing that on you, or somebody from the external family says something to you that feels like pressure, or, you think that your work thinks you should do things a certain way, or society thinks you should do things a certain way. What do you do with that when you've got that external pressure that just feels out of alignment?
For sure. Definitely depending on the situation, but my go-to is just to ignore the pressure. If it is, like you said, a family member, someone who's telling me, "Oh, you need to do this, you need to do this," I'll just stop talking to them. Or I will stop talking to them about that, topic. If the pressure is that let's say they're saying, "Oh, I need to enroll in school. I need to enroll in school. I need to enroll." Obviously, I'm already enrolled in school, but just using that as an example. And that's not something that I want to do at this time. I will either just stop talking to them about school. And if we can't stop talking about school, then we just won't talk. That's kind of and not saying that that is necessarily the best way to handle that pressure, but that is kind of just what I do. Or if I am seeing people on social media, pressure people to push their body past its limit and, to work hard every single day and, never take a rest day and all that stuff. That's not something that I personally align with. So I'll just block that account, or I'll unfollow them, or I'll do whatever it is I need to do. I know a lot of social medias now have like a not interested button. So that way you can say, like, I don't want to see, similar posts to this. So I just tune that pressure out. I don't choose to listen to it. I don't choose to engage with it. I don't choose to try to change, if it's a family member or social media or whatever it is. I don't choose to try to change their mind or try to explain to them, going back to that example, I don't want to explain to you why I'm not enrolled in school or why, this isn't the best fit for me right now. I'm just going to choose to cut that out. So that is kind of how I deal with it. And again, it's important to recognize whether that is negative pressure or if that is positive, encouragement and positive pressure of, hey, have you been enrolled back in school yet? I know that you want to get this degree. And I think it definitely depends on where it's coming from. But if it's that negative pressure, I have no problem with just cutting it out of my life.
Well, and a lot of people have a lot of opinions about other people's lives. And I truly believe
Mhm.
if they would take that time and energy and apply it to themselves, we would all be a lot happier. So
For
it's
sure.
much easier for people to point the finger and put pressure on other people than it is for them to turn their finger back at themselves and look in the mirror and say, hey, where do I need to give a little bit of healthy pressure to
For
myself?
sure. I definitely agree. So mom, when you were talking about applying pressure to yourself, how do you make sure that that's healthy and that's a positive form of pressure and it's not that, you're making your life miserable trying to pressure yourself to do something?
Yeah, I think when you are feeling those miserable twinges that you talked about, right? Like you're holding yourself to some standard that you've set and you're putting pressure on yourself to execute that. Is it because it's something that truly needs to happen? Or is it become it's something you truly want? And there's going to be some discomfort sometimes in achieving those things you really want or things that really need to happen. You have to be willing to push through that discomfort. And sometimes the only way you're going to do it is to apply some pressure to yourself. And so, again, you want to make sure it's healthy pressure, because if you're beating yourself up because you didn't work out yesterday, or you're beating yourself
Hmm.
up because you forgot to call your parents on Sunday, like you said you were going to, yeah, it's important to me to keep up my relationship with my family, but maybe something came up on Sunday and I didn't get to do it. But then if on Monday I'm like, oh my goodness, I didn't call my parents yesterday. Now I feel horrible. I hope they weren't sitting and waiting. Like that kind of pressure just puts you in a negative spiral. So when I
Hmm.
start to feel those twinges of negativity, right, then it's time for me to stop and be like, okay, Number one, is this thing that you're putting pressure on yourself for, is it worth it? Is it something you truly still want? And if it is, how are we turning this to a positive? Because I am not, as a person, going to respond to negative pressure. I never have. I put enough pressure on myself. I know grandma tells a story of me coming home from kindergarten with a red check mark. Cried the whole rest of the day. Like, I put enough pressure on myself. I have done a lot of work to try not to be a perfectionist, but I really will look at that piece of discomfort from that internal pressure and be like, okay, is this good discomfort? Is this really moving me towards something I want, something I need? Is it my next right step? Or is it bad pressure? And if it's bad pressure, I'm going to have a little pep talk with myself and say, cut it out. I've also asked people to hold me accountable for that at different times. I've been like, if you hear me saying XYZ about this situation or about myself or whatever, I want you to call me out on it. And so I've used my support group, my people around me, to help me make sure that it's positive pressure that's moving me forward, because nothing is going to come from negative pressure, from that beating yourself up, from that downward spiral. There will be no forward trajectory. You're just going to get stuck and keep repeating the same things over and over and never make any progress. So that's kind of what I use to make sure that that pressure is a positive force.
For sure. And I think it's important to kind of, when you gave the example of beating yourself up for not going to the gym, it's important to kind of cut out that negative energy and that negative pressure, because it's just, for most people, it's not going to propel you to reach your goals, and it's not going to get you there. So I think, kind of checking yourself and saying, okay, is this positive, pressure? Is this positive reinforcement for me? And if it's not, cutting that out. And maybe that positive pressure doesn't look like beating yourself up for not going to the gym today, but it looks like the positive pressure of setting your alarm an hour earlier the next day, so that way you can make sure that you have time to go to the gym. Or that positive pressure looks like, okay, I didn't make it to the gym today, so I'm going to make sure I eat 100% on track with whatever my eating habits are, so that way I know I'm still making steps. Or it might look like, okay, I didn't go to the gym, but I can go for a walk outside for 20 minutes real quick, or whatever it may be. I think applying that positive pressure can definitely be beneficial.
And I love what you said earlier too about like looking at what you're consuming as far as social media is concerned. And if there is something that's a negative, that you're feeling negative pressure from, only choosing those inputs that are positive pressure, right? That are encouraging you, that are inspiring you, that are providing a means for you to get to the end, that leaves you feeling happy, joyful, successful, right? Like, you can be on a really, really hard journey, but if the pressure you're putting on yourself is positive, it can be a joyful experience. So I think it's important to remember
For
that
sure.
when you're
And I
putting,
think, oh, I was going to
go ahead.
say, I just think when you were talking about social media, I am a big advocate for, and I think more people should use the block button. I think I am the block button's number one user. If I am scrolling on TikTok and I see someone and I don't like their glasses, I'll block them, because it doesn't, there's no point in seeing you around. So if someone, I'll block someone for as small of a thing as that. So I have no problem blocking someone if they say something that doesn't align with me, or different things like that. And I think sometimes people almost like to complain about that negative pressure, and they like to say, oh, Marci's on social media talk about this and talking about that, and I don't understand her perspective, blah blah blah. If you don't like whoever it may be, just block them, remove them from. If you don't like the way that they talk about diet, or the way they talk about exercise, or the way they talk about saving money, or the way they talk about self-improvement, or whatever, if you follow if your goal for the year, or an improvement you want to make on yourself, and you need a little bit of pressure is to clean your house. If you need someone to pressure you to, really get down and deep clean your house. And if you're following some people who, make cleaning videos on social media and you don't like the way they clean, block them. Find someone who does. There's so many people who create content on
Yes.
social media that there is someone out there. There are people, me being really big into running and fitness, there are people who are very kind with the way that they make their videos. And, oh, if you don't feel like getting out for a run today, that's okay. And to understand that. And then there's people who will get on social media and say, I don't care if you don't want to run today. You need to get out there and run. I don't care if it's snowing, raining, if you wake up sick. And not saying either one of those is right, but those are two far ends of the spectrum. And there's so many influencers throughout that spectrum that will kind of incorporate both. So finding people that work for you, that will apply the pressure that you need, I think is definitely important.
Well, I better be careful when I order my new glasses. Make sure you like them so you're not blocking me on social media, right? So I'll be sending you a picture from the eyeglasses place saying,
Before.
please meet your approval. So I've seen internal pressure turn you and your siblings inside out on occasion, right? You guys unfortunately inherited that from me, and it does take several years and several experiences to outgrow that. I hope that watching me do the work has meant that you guys will be able to outgrow that much at a much younger age than I did. So how do you rein it in, Cayd, when that internal pressure is not healthy?
For sure. I think, like you said, it's definitely something that's taken some work, and I think it's something that you kind of have to work on yourself and that you're going to get to at some point. I think it's something that, no one can just tell you to, stop applying so much pressure to yourself or whatever it may be. But once you do that work and realize that pressure should be a tool that propels you forward and doesn't hold you back and doesn't make you feel bad about yourself, I think that that is a key that will help you to kind of rein that pressure in and to apply a more positive pressure. Kind of like you talked about, I was very hard on myself from a young age to make sure I got good grades in school or to make sure I was doing good at whatever activity I was doing, to the point that it would sometimes harm me, or I would take on so much between work and school and, friends and family because I wanted to be successful in all those areas that it ended up hurting me. So understanding that that internal pressure is something that you can control and you can control your expectations for yourself and adjusting those accordingly.
Yeah, you definitely don't have to say, well, I'm just a person who's super hard on myself. Like, right? That is a very fixed mindset. And in this family, we choose to have growth mindset, right? And we're hoping that everybody else takes that on too, because there are so many things about our own internal defaults, right? That we can work towards being better and kinder to ourselves. And that's just one of them, right? That hard pressure, that perfectionistic, hard driving component that you were born with, you can learn and change that to make it a force for good.
For sure, for sure. So, mom, as you're big, what can I help you to deal with pressure that life applies to you? I think that obviously looks a little bit different as a big rather than a little kid, because, especially looking at me moving out soon and things like that, we're not in your daily orbit as much. So, what can bigs do to help their parents through that pressure that life just naturally will apply?
Yeah, I think, approaching conversations again with curiosity. I think, when I was a young adult, like I don't ever remember, other than asking my parents what they'd been up to, I don't ever remember like if I thought they were under pressure in some way,
Hmm.
like having a conversation with them about that. And society's changed a lot. And I think what we have conversations about has opened up a lot. So I would say just approaching your conversations with your parents, especially if you live away, like your communications, make them regular, give that your parent that sign of life, but also plan to have a decent conversation with them on a regular basis. And if they are letting you know or you suspect that they're under pressure, just asking. Sometimes it's just your family knows you very well, and so your
Hmm.
kids know their parents very well. And it used to be that parents spent a lot of time trying to allow their children to think that parents were perfect as long as possible, right? Until all of a sudden the parent did something that wasn't perfect and the child's image of that parent just exploded, right? I
Hmm.
did not raise you guys that way. I have been very honest with you guys about who I am as a person, about what my challenges are, about how things can be hard, about how things can be made easier. We very much are a sink or swim together type of ship in
Hmm.
this family. And so I think just being willing to have the conversations, checking in regularly, and then it's as simple as saying, is there anything I can do to help? Because sometimes it's just hearing me out, right? Like
Hmm.
letting me be vulnerable with you, even though I'm your parent. Like I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but seeing me being able to be vulnerable and trusting you guys with what my challenges or where my pressures are allows you to do the same, either with myself or with other people that are close to you, rather than sitting and struggling with it. So I would say it's those conversations approach from curiosity and then asking what you can do to help.
For sure, for sure. I definitely agree with that. Asking what you can do for help and just having open conversations about it. And I think sometimes, just as a general rule, a lot of people don't talk about things just because they don't want to bring them up. But a lot of times, if you bring it up in the conversation, people are open to talking about it. So if you, as a big, ask your parent, um, you know, have you been under a lot of stress lately? What have pressure been? And they might say no, and they might not be open to it. But a lot of times just having someone ask that question will open up that conversation.
Yeah, and beyond conversation, Cayd, or maybe a different type of conversation, what can parents do to help their young adult child that's dealing with that heavy load of pressure? I know as a parent, like I can tell each of my kids react in a different way when they are under a lot of pressure. And so
Mhm.
if I happen to be around them, I'm observing what that is. And I'm like, high pressure situation right here, right?
Mhm.
But what can parents do to help their child that's dealing with a heavy load of pressure, whether they recognize it as their parent or whether it's suspected or going
Mhm.
undetected?
For sure. I think one thing that parents just tend to do that I've seen with you and with other parents is that they kind of almost have what I like to call the takeover spirit and just like to take over, which is a natural instinct as a parent to want to, if your kid is having problems, your kid's stressed out, to just take that pressure away from them. But I think, especially when we're talking about young adults, it's important for us to have that pressure and to learn how to process it and to learn how to work through it and learn our coping mechanisms. And having a parent just take over everything doesn't help. But I think having a parent that can maybe, and it looks different depending on the situation. Maybe your a young adult just needs to talk to you. Maybe your young adult, if you live, in the same city or in the same house, needs you to cook them dinner and bring dinner over. Or, if you live in the same house, do their laundry or whatever it is that it looks like. If you can kind of pick up on those signs that your kid is under pressure, ask them if there's anything you can do to help. And it might not be related to that situation that's causing them pressure, but it can help relieve the overall pressure in their lives.
So we don't want to have that takeover spirit. I love that. You need to
Exactly.
coin that phrase. I had not heard you say that before, so that made me giggle. So pressure is definitely something that both as parents and bigs, we need to keep an eye on, making sure it's not too intense, making sure it's coming from the right source, which is yourself. You do not have to respond, as you've heard Cayd and I talk about, to the external pressure coming from society. Bigs and parents can work it out in a healthy way when expectations at home might be causing the pot to boil. That can be something handled through conversation and support of each other and support of us reaching our maximum potential. Internal pressure also needs to be at a level that enables you to execute life in a healthy way to achieve your dreams. If it's coming from anywhere and it's unrealistic or it's causing you pain, not just a little bit of pushing you towards something that you really want to do, but it's actually causing you pain, it needs to be addressed. So if you observe your parent or your big dealing with an undue amount of pressure in their life, again, approach a conversation from a place of curiosity. Don't come in with that takeover spirit that Cayd talked about as a parent. And don't ignore it if you're a young adult and you think your parent is under pressure. Bring it up. So see if you can help them gain some perspective or put the pressure in its rightful place. A little support can go a long way, as can a big hug and maybe going to do something fun to release some steam together. So, Cayd, any closing thoughts you'd like to share about making sure pressure is a force for good and not distress before you close us out?
For sure. I think kind of like I mentioned, just removing that negative pressure. So whether it be from other people that might, like I said, look like stopping conversations around certain topics with them, or just removing them as a whole, or that negative pressure with yourself. I think just changing that self-talk to being more positive and to being more encouraging, and just kind of changing your perspective and not beating yourself up over the things you didn't do, but more so look at the things you can do to, accomplish what you want to accomplish. So I think just being able to recognize that and developing that skill will definitely lead to applying a more positive pressure in a good way rather than negative pressure. But with that being said, that is a wrap for this episode of Raising Bigs. We thank you all for listening today. We hope you found some takeaways, a fresh perspective, and maybe even an action step or two in this episode. Again, we are not experts, but we can authentically share what we're learning in hopes of making the path a little more joy filled for those who are listening. You can find this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and on YouTube. Please subscribe and share with those in your circle who you think might benefit from hearing it. A new episode is released on those three platforms every single week.
You can also visit my life coaching website at marcihawkinson.com or email me at lifecoachmarci@gmail.com. I am on Facebook at Life Coach Marci and on Instagram at life_coach_Marci. Cayd, where can our listeners find you?
My handle across all social media platforms is at the Cayd Berrigan. That's where you can find me. The best way to contact us or give us feedback is to DM either one of us on social media or to reach out on the Contact Me page on my mom's website. Again, that is marcihawkinson.com. We appreciate any feedback, questions, or topic ideas that you may like to share, and we will see you next time on Raising Bigs.